Assalamu alaikum. I'm Saif al-Islam, your host for halalradio 1, broadcasting live from Sheffield to the UK and the rest of the world. This is the 7 o'clock slot, coming to you tonight and every night throughout the month of Ramadan. Please join us and listen to the stories of men around the messenger. Tonight we carry on with Khalid ibn Walid. Please join us in a small prayer before we begin. Ya Allah, we depend on you. We have no power of our own. When things are going well for us, we know they have come from you. We have no power of our own. In our trials, we rely on you. In our temptation, we trust in you. Our success is in your hands, and so is our lives. We have no power of our own. Ya Jabir, Ya Kareem, we cannot do without you. Save us from all evil, and guide us going out and coming in, now and forevermore. Ameen. Khalid ibn Walid, a sleepless man who will not let anyone sleep. His story is rather a perplexing one. He was the deadly enemy of Muslims in the Battle of Uhud and the deadly enemy of the enemies of Islam in the remaining Muslim battles. I feel at a loss concerning where to begin and what to begin with. He himself hardly believed that his life had really begun until that day on which he shook hands with the Prophet as a sign of his allegiance to him. If he could have ruled out all the years, even the days that preceded that day, he would not have fought twice. Let us then begin with that part of his life which he himself loved most. Let us begin from that glorious moment when his heart was affected by Allah and his spirit was blessed by the Most Merciful. Thus it overflowed with devotion to his religion, his Prophet, and to the memorable martyrdom in the way of truth. This martyrdom enabled him to erase the burdens of his advocation of falsehood in the past. One day he sat alone in deep thought concerning that new religion that was gaining momentum and gaining ground every day. He wished that Allah, the knower of what is hidden and unseen, would guide him to the right path. His blessed heart was revived by the glad tidings of certainty. Therefore, he said to himself, by Allah, it is crystal clear now. This man is indeed a prophet, so how long shall I procrastinate? By Allah, I will go and submit myself to him. Now let us hear him, may Allah be pleased with him, narrate his blessed visit to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his journey from Mecca to Al-Madinah to join the ranks of the believers. I hoped to find an escort, and I ran into Uthman ibn Talha. And when I told him about my intention, he agreed to escort me. We travelled shortly before daybreak, and as we reached the plain, we ran into Amr ibn al-As. After we exchanged greetings, he asked us about our destination, and when we told him, it turned out that he himself was going to the same place to submit himself to Islam. The three of us arrived at Al-Madinah on the first day of Safar in the 8th year. As soon as I laid eyes on the Prophet, I said, peace be upon you, O Prophet. So he greeted me with a bright face. Immediately I submitted myself to Islam and bore witness to the truth. Finally the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, I knew that you have an open mind, and I prayed that it would lead you to safety. I took an oath of allegiance to the Prophet, then asked him, please ask Allah forgiveness for me of all the wrongdoings I have committed to hinder men from the path of Allah. The Prophet said, Islam erases all the wrongdoings committed before it, yet I pleaded with him, please pray for me. Finally he supplicated to Allah, O Allah, forgive Khalid for all the wrongdoings he committed before he embraced Islam. Then Amir ibn al-Asad and Uthman ibn La'a stepped forward and submitted themselves to Islam and their oath of allegiance to the Prophet. Notice these words, please ask Allah forgiveness for me, for all the wrongdoings I've committed in the past to hinder men from the path of Allah. Now whoever has the perception and insight to read between the lines will find the true meaning of these words of Khalid, who became the sword of Allah and the hero of Islam. When we come across various instances in the course of his life story, these words are our key to understanding. For the time being, let us accompany Khalid, who had just embraced Islam, and watch the Quraysh great warrior who had always had the reins of leadership. Let us see the subletters of Arabs in the art of attack and retreat as he returned his back on the idols of his ancestors and the glory of his people unwelcomed. Along with the Prophet and the Muslims, the advent of the new world that Allah had destined to rise under the standard of Muhammad and the slogan of monotheism. Let us hear the Muslim Khalid's impressive story. To start with, do you recall the story of the three martyrs of the Battle of Mu'tah? They were Zayd ibn Haritha, Jafar ibn Abi Talib, and Abd Allah ibn Rawah. They were the heroes of the Battle of Mu'tah in Syria, in which the Romans mobilized 200,000 warriors. Nevertheless, the Muslims achieved unprecedented victory. Do you recall the glorious, sad words with which the Prophet announced the sad news of the death of the three commanders of the battle? Zayd ibn Haritha took the standard and fought holding it until he died as a martyr. Then Jafar took it and fought clinging to it until he one martyred him. And then finally Abd Allah ibn Rawah gripped it and held it fast until he one martyred him. This is the only part of the Prophet's speech which I have written before, but now I find it appropriate to write the rest of the story. Then it is gripped by a sword of the swords of Allah, and he fought until he achieved victory. Who was that hero? He was Khalid ibn al-Walid, who threw himself into the battle as if he were an ordinary soldier under the three commanders whom the Prophet assigned. The first commander was Zayd ibn Haritha, the second was Jafar ibn Abi Talib, and the third was Abd Allah ibn Rawah. They won martyrdom in the same order on the vicious battlefield. After the last commander had won martyrdom, Thabit ibn Akram took the standard with his right hand and raised it high amidst the Muslim army. His purpose was to stop any potential disarray inside the lines. Thabit then carried the standard and hastened towards Khalid ibn Walid and said, "Take the standard, Abu Sulaiman." Khalid thought that he did not deserve to take it, since he had newly embraced Islam. He had no right to preside over an army that included the Ansar and the Mujahideen, who had preceded him in embracing Islam. These qualities of decorum, modesty and gratitude were becoming of Khalid's worthiness. He said, "I will not dare to hold it. Go on, hold it, for you deserve it better than me. First, you are older. Second, you witnessed the Battle of Badr." Thabit answered, "Come on, take it. You know the art of fighting far better than me. By Allah, I only held it to give it to you." Then he called on the Muslims. "Do you vote for Khalid's command?" They readily answered, "Yes, we do." At that moment, the great warrior mounted his horse and thrust the standard forward with his right hand, as if he were knocking on closed doors that had been closed far too long. And those times had finally come to be flung wide open, so this act was to lead the hero to a long but passable road on which he would leap during the Prophet's life and after his death, until destiny brought his ingenuity to its inevitable end. Although Khalid was in charge of the army command, hardly any military expertise could change and already determine outcomes of the battle, turning defeat into victory or turning victory into defeat. The only thing that a genius could manage to do was to prevent more casualties or damage in the Muslim army from occurring and end the battle with the remainder of the army intact. Sometimes a great commander must resort to that kind of preventative retreat measure that would prevent the annihilation of the rest of his striking force on the battlefield. However, such a retreat was potentially impossible. Yet if the saying, "Nothing stands in the way of the fearless heart," is true, there was no more fearless and ingenious than Khalid. Instantly, the sword of Allah flung himself into the vast battlefield. His eyes were as sharp as a hawk's. His mind worked quickly, turning all the potentialities in his mind over. While the fierce fight raged, Khalid quickly split his army into two groups, with each assigned a certain task, and he used his incredible expertise and outstanding craftiness to open a wide space for the Roman army, through which the whole Muslim army retreated intact. This narrowly escaped was credited to the ingenuity of the Muslim hero. In the battle, the Prophet gave Khalid the great epithet, "the sword of Allah." Shortly thereafter, the Quraysh violated their treaty with Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the Muslims marched under Khalid's to conquer Mecca. The Prophet assigned the command of the fight flank of the army to Khalid ibn al-Walid. Khalid entered Mecca as one of the commanders of the Muslim army and the Muslim nation. He recalled his youth when he galloped across its plains and mounted as one of the commanders of the army of paganism and polytheism. Khalid stood there collecting his childhood days, playing on its wonderful pastures and his useful memories of its wild entertainment. These memories of the past weighed down on him, and he was filled with remorse for his wasted life in which he worshipped inanimate and helpless idols. But before he bit the tips of his fingers in remorse, he was overpowered by the magnificent and spell of the scene of the glorious light that approached Mecca and swept away all that came before it. The astounding scene of the weak and the oppressed people, on whose bodies the marks of torture and horror still showed, was magnificent as they returned to the land they had been unjustly driven out of. Only this time they returned on horseback under the fluttering standard of Islam. Their whispers of Dal Akram's house yesterday turned into loud and glorious shouts of Allahu Akbar that shook Mecca, and the victorious cry, "There is no God but Allah," with which the entire universe seemed to be celebrating a feast day. How did this miracle come about? What is the explanation of what had happened? Simply, there was no logical or rational explanation whatsoever, but the power of the verse that the victorious marching soldiers repeated with "There's no God but Allah," and Allahu Akbar, as they looked with joy at one another and said, "It is a promise of Allah, and Allah fails not his promise." Quran 30 verse 6. Then Khalid raised his head and watched in reverence, joy and satisfaction as the standard of Islam fluttered on the horizon. He said to himself, "Indeed, it is a promise of Allah, and Allah fails not in his promise." Then he bent his head in gratitude and thanks for Allah's blessing that had guided him to Islam and made him one of those who would usher Islam into Mecca, rather than one of those who would be spurred by his conquest to submit themselves to Islam. Khalid was always near the Prophet. He devoted his excellent abilities to the service of the religion he firmly believed in and devoted his life to. After the glorious Prophet had died and Abu Bakr became Caliph, the sly and treacherous cyclone of those who apostatized from Islam shrouded the new religion and its deafening roar and devastating outbreak. Abu Bakr quickly chose the hero of the battlefields and man of honor, namely Abu Salman, the sword of Allah, Khalid ibn al-Walid. It is true that Abu Bakr himself was the head of the first army that fought against the apostates. Nevertheless, he saved Khalid for the divisive day, and Khalid was truly the mastermind and inspired hero of the last crucial battle that was considered the most dangerous of all the apostasy battles. When the apostates' armies were taking measures to perfect their large conspiracy, the great Caliph Abu Bakr insisted on taking the lead of the Muslim army. The leaders of the companions tried desperately to persuade him not to, yet his decision was final. Perhaps he meant to give the cause for which he mobilized and rallied this army a special importance, tinged with sanctity. He could not achieve his aim except by his actual participation in the deadly battle and his direct command of some of all of the Muslim troops. It was a battle between the power of belief against the power of apostasy and darkness. The outbreak of apostasy posed serious threats. In spite of the fact that it started an accidental insubordination, soon the opportunists and the malicious enemies of Islam, whether from the Arab tribes or from across the borders, where the power of the Romans and Persians perched, seized their last opportunity to hinder the sweeping tide of Islam. Therefore, they instigated mutiny and chaos from behind the scenes. Unfortunately, mutiny flowed like an electric current through the Arab tribes, like Asad Ghatfan, Abstil Dubian, then Bani Amir, Hawazin, Sulman, and Bani Talmin. Hardly had the skirmishes started with limited numbers of soldiers than they were reinforced with enormous armies, often of thousands of warriors. The people of Bahrain, Oman, and Al-Marah responded to this horrible plot. Suddenly, Islam was facing a dangerous predicament, and the apostate enemy closed in upon the disbelievers and closed in on the believers, but Abu Bakr was ready for them. He mobilized the Muslim armies and marched to where the armies of Bani Abs, Bani Murrah, and Bani Dubjan gathered. The battle started and went on for a long time before the Muslims achieved a great victory. No sooner had the victorious Muslim army reached Al-Madinah than the Caliph sent in another expedition. News spread that the armies of the apostates were increasing in number and weapons by hour. Abu Bakr marched at the head of the second army, Only this time the prominent companions lost their patience and clung to their opinion that the Caliph should remain in Al-Madinah. Accordingly, Imam Ali stood in Abu Bakr's way as he was marching at the head of the army and held the reins of his camel and asked, "Where to, Caliph of the Prophet? I will tell you the same words that the Prophet told you in the battle of Uhud. Sheathe your sword, Abu Bakr, and don't expose us to such a tragic loss at this critical time." The Caliph had to comply with this consensus. Therefore, he split the army into 11 divisions and assigned a certain role for each one. Khalid ibn al-Walid would be the commander over a large division. When the Caliph gave every commander his standard, he addressed Khalid saying, "I heard the Prophet say, Khalid is truly an excellent slave of Allah and a brother of the same tribe. He is a sword of Allah, unsheathed against disbelievers and hypocrites." Khalid and his army fought one battle after another and achieved one victory after another until they reached the crucial battle. In this battle of Al-Yamama, the Bani Arifia and their allies from the Arab tribe organised out of the most dangerous armies of the apostasy, led by Muslimah, the liar. A number of Muslim forces tried to defeat Muslima's army but failed. Finally, the Caliph ordered Khalid to march to where Bani Hanifah was camped. No sooner had Muslimah heard that Khalid was on his way to fight him than he reorganised his army, turning it into a devastating and horrible enemy machine. Both armies met in a fierce combat. When you read the history of the Prophet, peace be upon him, a perplexing awe will take hold of you, for you will find yourself watching a battle that resembles our modern battles in its atrocity and horrors, though it differs in weapons and tactics. Khalid's army stopped at the sand dune that overlooked Al-Yamama. At the same time, Muslimah marched haughtily and with great might, followed by endless waves of his soldiers. Khalid assigned the brigades and standard of the commanders of his army. As the two armies clashed in a terrible, large-scale, devastating war, the Muslim martyrs fell one by one, like roses in a garden on which a stubborn tempest blew. Immediately, Khalid realised that the enemy was about to win the battle, so he galloped up a nearby hill and surveyed the battlefield. He realised that his soldiers' morale was waning under the pressure of blitz of Muslimah's army. Instantly, he decided to trigger a new feeling of responsibility under the Muslim army. So he summoned the flanks and reorganised their position on the battlefield. He cried out victoriously, "Fight together in your own groups and let us see who will surpass the other and win the field." They all obeyed and reorganised themselves in their own groups. Thus the Mujahideen fought under their standard, the Ansar fought under theirs, and the groups fought under its own standard. It became fairly easy to determine where defeat came from. As a result, the Muslims were charged with their enthusiasm, firmness and determination. Every now and then Khalid was careful to cry out, "Allahu Akbar," and there is no God but Allah. He ordered his army in such a way that he turned the swords of his men into inevitable victory that no one could escape. It was striking that in a few minutes the Muslim army turned the tables on Muslim's army. Muslimah's soldiers fell in tens of hundreds and thousands like flies that were suffocated by the deadly spray of pesticide. Khalid ordered his soldiers with a kind of enthusiasm that flowed into them, an electric current. This was a manifestation of his striking genius. This was the manner in which the most decisive and fierce battle of apostasy was conducted. In the end, Muslimah was slain and the bodies of his men were scattered on the battlefield. Finally, the standard of the liar, impostor, was buried forever. On hearing the good news, the Caliph offered the prayer of thanksgiving to Allah, the Great and Most High, for bestowing victory on the hands of his hero. Abu Bakr had enough discernment and insight to realise the danger of the evil powers that purged on the borders, threatening the promising future of Islam and Muslims. These evil powers were the Persians in Iraq and the Romans in Syria. These two dwindling empires that clung tenuously to the distorted remnant of their past glory were not only afflicting the people of Iraq and Syria with horrible torment, but also manipulating them. Notwithstanding the fact that the majority of populations were Arabs, they instigated them to fight Muslim Arabs, who carried the standard of the new religion, which sought to pull down the vestige of the ancient world and eradicate the decay and corruption in which it was steeped. The great and blessed Caliph sent his orders to Khalid to march towards Iraq, so the hero did so. I wish that one would give him more space to follow up in detail the proceedings of this magnificent victory. Upon arriving in Iraq, the first thing that Khalid did was to dispatch messages to every governor and deputy who ruled the provinces and cities of Iraq in the name of the emperor. These messages were as follows: in the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Khalid ibn al-Walid sends this message to the satraps of Persia. Peace will be upon him who follows the guidance. All praises and thanks be to Allah, who dispersed your power and thwarted your deceitful plots. On the one hand, he who performs our prayers, directing his face to the Qibla, to the face of the sacred mosque in Mecca, and eats our slaughtered animals, is a Muslim. He has the same rights and duties that we have. On the other hand, if you do not want to embrace Islam, then as soon as you receive my message, send over the jizya, tax levied upon non-Muslim people who are under the protection of a Muslim government. And I give you my word that I will respect and honor this covenant. But if you do not agree to either choice, then by Allah, I will send to you people who crave death as much as you crave life. Khalid's scouts, whom he planted everywhere, warned him against the enormity of the armies that were organized by the commanders of Persia and Iraq. As usual, Khalid did not waste much time. Therefore, he flung his soldiers against the falsehood of disbelief so as to devastate it. Victory followed him wherever he went, from Al-Ubala to As-Sadir, Al-Najaf, Al-Hijr, Al-Ambir, then Al-Qidamiyah. There was one victory procession after another. The glad tidings of Khalid's arrival blew like a fresh breeze wherever he went to usher in Islam. The weak and the oppressed people found sanctuary in the new religion that saved them from the occupation and the oppression of the Persians. It was impressive that Khalid's first order to his troops was, do not attack or hurt the peasants. Leave them to work at peace unless some of them attack you. Only then I permit you to defend yourselves. He marched on with his victorious army, swept his enemies and cut through their ranks like a knife cutting through melting butter. The adhan resounded everywhere. I wonder if it had reached the Romans in Syria. Did they realize that cries of Allah is the greatest signal of the end of their deteriorating civilization? Indeed, they must have heard it. In fact, the adhan cast terror into them, yet in a desperate attempt to recapture the phantom of their empire, they decided heedlessly to fight a battle of despair and perdition. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq mobilized his armies and chose a group of his prominent commanders such as Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, Ma ibn al-As, Yazid ibn as-Sufyan, and Muawiyah ibn Abu Sufyan to lead them. When the Roman emperor heard the news of the mobilization of these armies, he advised his ministers and commanders to make peace with the Muslims to avoid inevitable defeat. However, his ministers and commanders insisted on fighting and maintained, by our Lord, we will make Abu Bakr's hair stand on end before his horses breed in our land. Consequently, they mobilized an army estimated at 240,000 warriors. The Muslim commanders dispatched this terrifying news to Abu Bakr, who pledged, by Allah, I will rid them of their doubts through Khalid. Thus, the antidote of their evil suggestions of mutiny, aggression and disbelief, namely Khalid ibn al-Walid, was ordered to go on an expedition to Syria, where he was to command the Muslim armies. Khalid promptly acted upon his orders and left Iraq under al-Muqtaniya ibn Haratha's supervision and marched with his troops until they reached the Muslim headquarters in Syria. His ingenuity enabled him to organize the Muslim armies and coordinate their different positions in no time. Shortly before the outbreak of war, he addressed his warriors after he had praised and thanked Allah, saying, "This is Allah's day. On this day we must not give way to pride, not let injustice overrule. I advise you to purify your jihad and your deeds for Allah. Let us take turns in command. Let each and every one of us take over the command for a day. This is Allah's day. What a wonderful onset. We must not give way to pride nor let injustice overrule. This sentence is even more graceful, adequate and awesome. On the one hand, the great leader was not lacking in self-denial and cleverness, for in spite of the fact that the Caliph had assigned the command of the army to him, he did not want to give Satan a chance to whisper in the breasts of his soldiers. Therefore he relinquished his absolute hold on the army to every soldier in the ranks, even though he was already the commander. Thus the commander of the army rotated from day to day. The enormous and well-equipped Roman army was really terrifying. On the other hand, the Roman commander realized that time was on the Muslims' favor, for they were given to protracted battles which would guarantee their victory. Therefore he decided to mobilize all their troops for a quick battle to finish off the Arabs once and for all. Undoubtedly, the courageous Muslims on that day were gripped by fear and anxiety, yet in such a predicament they were resorted to their faith, in which they found hope and victory. Notwithstanding the might of the Roman armies, the experienced Abu Bakr had firm belief in Khalid's abilities. Therefore he said, "Khalid is the man for it. By Allah, I will rid them of doubts with Khalid." Let the Romans parade their terrifying enormous forces, for the Muslims had their antidote. Ibn al-Walid mobilized and rallied his army, then divided into brigades. He laid out a new plan for attack and defense that adhered to the Romans' war strategy and tactics, which he was well acquainted with from past experience with the Persians. He was ready for all possibilities. Strangely enough, the battle raged exactly as he had imagined it would, step by step and one fight after another. If he had actually counted the number of strokes of swords, he would not have been much more accurate. Before the two armies clashed, he was worried about the possibility that some of the soldiers, especially those who had newly embraced Islam, might flee upon seeing the terrifying, enormous Roman army. Khalid believed that the ingenuity of the victory and firmness were one of the same. He believed that the Muslim army could not afford the loss of even one of its soldiers, for it was enough to spread malignant panic and havoc inside the army, which was something that even the entire Roman army could not succeed in doing. In consequence, he was extremely firm concerning anyone who deserted his post and weapon and ran away. In the Battle of Yarmouk in particular, and afterwards his troops took their positions, he called the Muslim women and for the first time gave them swords. He ordered them to stand at the rear of the line to kill anyone who flees. It was the magic touch of a mastermind. Shortly before the battle erupted, the Roman commander asked Khalid to show himself, for he wanted a few words with him. Khalid rode towards him. Then he galloped to the area that separated the two armies. Mahan, the Roman commander, addressed Khalid, saying, "We know that nothing but weariness and hunger made you leave your country and go on this expedition. If you wish, we shall give 10 dinners, clothes and food to every one of you, on one condition, that you return to your country, and next year we will do the same." Khalid gnashed his teeth as he was provoked by his flagrant lack of manners, yet he repressed himself and answered confidently, "We didn't leave our country out of hunger, as you said, but we heard that the Roman blood is very delicious and tasty, so we have decided to quench our thirst with it." Swiftly the hero rode back to the ranks of his army and raised the Muslim standard to the full length of his arms. Then he launched the attack. Allahu Akbar, let the breeze of paradise blow. At once his army was like a missile as it charged into the battlefield. They met an extraordinary, monstrous and deadly combat. The Romans rushed into the battlefield with enormous number, yet they found that their foes were not an easy prey. The self-sacrifice and firmness that the Muslims displayed on that day were impressive. In the first place, one of the Muslim soldiers rushed to Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, may Allah be pleased with him, during the battle and said, "I have set my mind on martyrdom. Do you want me to take the message to the Prophet, peace be upon him, when I meet him?" Abu Ubaidah answered, "Yes, tell him. We have indeed found true what our Lord had promised us." Immediately the man darted like an arrow into the horrors of the battlefield. He craved death, therefore he fought fiercely with one sword, while thousands of swords were thrust into him until he won martyrdom. Secondly, Ikramah ibn Abjal. Yes, he was the son of an infamous Abjal. He called out to the Muslims when the Romans were killing anyone who came within the sweep of their swords and said, I fought against the Prophet, peace be upon him, before Allah guided me to Islam. So how can I possibly be afraid of fighting Allah's enemy after I submitted myself to Islam? Then he cried out, who gives me the pledge of death? He was given the pledge to death by a group of Muslims. Then they broke through the enemy's line. They preferred martyrdom to victory. Allah accepted the bargain, and they concluded through their pledge and won martyrdom. Thirdly, other Muslims were badly wounded, and water was brought so that they might quench their thirst. Yet when it was offered to the first one, he pointed to his brother, who was lying next to him, more seriously wounded, and who was more thirsty. Again, when his brother was offered water, he in his turn pointed to the next. Finally, the majority of them died thirsty after they had demonstrated an incredible example of self-denial and sacrifice. Indeed, the Battle of Al Yarmouk witnessed unprecedented, unmatched instances of self-sacrifice. Among these striking masterpieces of self-sacrifice exhibited by the determined will of the Muslims was the extraordinary portrait of Khalid ibn Walid, at the head of 100 soldiers who flung themselves against 40,000 Romans. Khalid kept calling out to his 100 soldiers, saying, by Allah, the Romans seem to have lost their patience and courage. Therefore I pray to Allah to let you have the upper hand over them. How could 100 soldiers have the upper hand over 40,000? It is indeed incredible. Yet there were not hearts of 100 soldiers filled with faith in Allah, the Most High, the Most Great. Were they not filled with faith in his trustworthy and honest prophet, peace be upon him? They were not filled with faith in that cause which represents the most persistent, vital issue in life. The cause represents piety and righteousness. And was not the Caliph Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Allah be pleased with him, the man who, while his flags were raised above the whole world, sat there in Al-Madinah, the new capital of the new world, milking with his own hands the ewes of widows and kneading with his own hands the bread of orphans? Was not that the commander, Khalid ibn Walid, the antidote of the doubts of the tyranny, arrogance, oppression and transgression? Was not the sword of Allah drawn against the powers of backwardness, decay and disbelief? Were not all these portraits a depiction of truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth? So let the breeze of victory blow. Let it blow strong, mighty and victorious. Khalid's ingenuity impressed the Roman officers and commanders so much so that Jerja, the Roman commander, asked Khalid to show himself doing a rest in the fighting. When they met, the Roman commander asked him, Khalid, tell me the truth and do not lie, for the freeman doesn't lie. Did Allah send down on your prophet a heavenly sword, and he gave it to you so that it enables you to kill anyone who comes within its sweep? Khalid answered, no. The man explained, then why do they call you the sword of Allah? Khalid explained, Allah sent his prophet to us. Some of us believed in him and others disbelieved in him. I was among the disbelievers until Allah guided my heart to Islam and to his prophet, peace be upon him, and I gave my allegiance. Therefore the prophet supplicated Allah for me, and he said, you are the sword of Allah. The Roman commander asked, what do you invite people to? Khalid answered, we invite people to monotheism and to Islam. He asked, does anyone who submits himself to Islam have the same reward as you? Khalid answered, yes, and even better. JJ explained, how? When you embraced Islam before he did? Khalid answered, we lived with the Prophet and saw with our own eyes his signs and miracles. Now anyone who has had the chance to see what we saw and hear what we heard was expected to submit himself to Islam sooner or later. As for you, who did not see or hear him, if despite this you believed in him and in the unseen, you will find better and greater reward if you purify your conscience on the intentions of Allah. The Roman commander cried out as he urged his horse closer to Khalid and stood next to him. Please, Khalid, teach me Islam. He submitted himself to Islam and prayed 2 rakas. Soon combat erupted once again. The Roman Jerja fought, but this time on the Muslim side, until he won martyrdom. Now let us watch closely how human greatness was manifested in one of the most remarkable scenes. The first version, narrated by the historian, said that while Khalid was commanding the Muslim army in this bloody, crucial war and wresting victory out of the claws of the Romans with admirable masterstrokes, the new Caliph Umar ibn Khattab, commander of the faithful, dispatched a message to him in which he saluted the Muslim army and announced the sad news of Abu Bakr's death, but Allah be pleased with him. Then he ordered Khalid to give up his command to Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. Khalid read the message and supplicated Allah to have mercy on Abu Bakr and bestow his guidance on Umar. Then he strictly ordered the messenger not to tell anyone about the purport of the message and not to leave his place or communication with anyone. Then Khalid resumed his command of the combat and concealed the news of Abu Bakr's death and Umar's orders until they had achieved victory. Finally, the hour of victory came and the Romans were defeated. It was only then that the hero approached Abu Ubaidah and saluted him. At first, Abu Ubaidah thought that he did it so in jest, yet he soon realized how serious and true this news was. Instantly, he kissed Khalid between his eyes and praised his greatness. The second version of the same incident is that the message was sent to Abu Ubaidah, who concealed the news from Khalid until the burden of war was over. Which of the two versions is authentic is not our concern. The only thing that interest is there is Khalid's conduct, which was superb in both versions. I cannot think of a situation in which Khalid manifested more loyalty and sincerity than this one. It did not matter to him whether he was a commander or a soldier. Both ranks were one and the same to him, as long as they enabled him to carry out his duties towards Allah, whom he believed in, the Prophet, peace be upon him, whom he gave allegiance to, and finally towards the religion which he embraced. This great self-control of Khalid and of the Muslims was not possible without the help and guidance of the unique type of caliphs who were at the head of the Muslim nations at that time. These caliphs were Abu Bakr and Umar. The mere mention of either name conjures up all unique and great traits created in mankind, notwithstanding the fact that Khalid and Umar were not exactly best friends. Umar's decency, justice and remarkable greatness were not in the least questioned by Khalid, hence his decision and judgment were not questioned. The unbiased conscience of the man who issued these orders reached the apex of piety, steadfastness and ferocity. Umar, the commander of the faithful, had nothing against Khalid but his overburdening and sharp sword. He vented these reservations when he suggested to Abu Bakr that Khalid should be dismissed after the death of Malik ibn Nuwayr. He said Khalid's sword is overburdening. He meant that it was swift, sharp and harsh. The Caliph as-Siddiq said, I would not sheathe what Allah had unsheathed against the disbelievers. Notice that Umar did not say that Khalid was overburdening, but used overburdening to describe the sword rather than the man. Not only did these words manifest the elevated politeness of the commander of the faithful, but also his profound appreciation of Khalid. Khalid was a man of war from head to toe. He dedicated his whole life before and after his Islam to becoming a shrewd and daring knight. Even his environment, the way he was brought up, were devoted to this ultimate goal. Whenever he travelled back in time, he saw the wars he waged against the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companions, and the strokes of his sword that had slain disbelievers and worshippers. Those memories agitated him and made him conscience-stricken. Therefore his swords longed to devastate the pillars of disbelief to compensate for his wrongdoings in the past. I think you still remember what went on between Khalid and the Prophet, peace be upon him, at the beginning of this chapter, particularly when Khalid asked the Prophet, please ask Allah's forgiveness for me, for all the wrongdoings I committed to hinder men from Allah's path. You also remember that even when the Prophet told him that Islam erased all the wrongdoings committed before it, he pleaded with him until he finally promised him to ask Allah's forgiveness for him, for all his mischief he had committed before he submitted himself to Islam. Surely when the sword is carried by such an extraordinary knight as Khalid and thrust upon the commands of a conscience, revived by the warmth of purification, sacrifice and absolute loyalty to a religion that was surrounded by conspiracy and animosity, it will be impossible for this sword to throw aside its strict principle or its spontaneous sharpness. For instance, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, sent him to some Arab tribes after the conquest of Mecca, he said to him, I am sending you there not as a warrior, but as a Muslim who invites to the way of Allah. Unfortunately, his soul got the better of him and forced him into the role of warrior, obliterating the role of the Muslim who invites to the way of Allah that the Prophet, peace be upon him, had ordered him to follow. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, heard what Khalid had done, he was stricken with anxiety and pain. Then he turned in the direction of the Qibla and raised his hands in supplication and apology to Allah and said, "O Allah, I free myself from blame for what Khalid has committed." Then he sent Ali to give compensatory blood money to the family of the deceased. The narrator said that Khalid absolved himself from blame when he said that Abdullah ibn Hudayfiyah as-Samir told him, "The Prophet has ordered you to attack them from their rejection of Islam." In spite of that, Khalid possessed superhuman energy. He was overtaken by an irresistible urge to devastate the idolatry of the ancient world. If we watched him pulling down the Uzza idol, which the Prophet, peace be upon him, ordered him to destroy, we would see that the resentment and wrath he showed while striking were so aggressive and violent that he did not seem to be striking a massive rock, but at a whole army, cutting the throat of its soldiers and spreading death everywhere. But he kept striking with his right hand, then with his left hand, then with his foot. He yelled at the scattered rubble and dust, "Uzza, I don't believe in you. Glory is not to be yours. I can see that Allah has humiliated you." We will always repeat the words of Umar, the commander of the faithful, about Khalid. Women who give birth to men like Khalid are extremely rare, as well as our earnest wish along with Umar that his word would lose its rashness. On that day of his death, Umar cried excessively. Later, people learned that his grief was not only caused by his personal loss, but also by the loss of his last chance to return the command to Khalid. Now that people were no longer infatuated with him, the reason behind his dismissal were now gone. Only this time, unfortunately, the man was gone too. Indeed, the great hero rushed to take his place in paradise, for it was about time he caught his breath. Considering the fact that no one on earth had been more restless than he, it was really about time his exhausted body could sleep for a while, considering that he was described by his friends and enemies alike as a sleepless man who would not let anyone sleep. If it were for him to decide, he would have chosen to live on until he had demolished all the decaying ruins of the ancient world and continued his jihad in the way of Allah and Islam. The sweet fragrance of this man's spirit will linger forevermore. Whenever horses neigh and the edge of swords glitter and the standards of monotheism flutter over Muslim armies, he used to say, "Nothing is dearer to me than a frosty night in the company of an infantry of Mujahideen, when we are to attack the disbeliever in the morning, not even the night in which I was wedded to a new bride or received the glad tidings of the birth of a new child." Therefore, the tragedy of his life, in his opinion, was dying in bed after he had spent his entire life on horseback, raising his glittering sword. It was difficult for him to accept that he was to die in bed after all the battles he had fought next to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and after he had annihilated the Roman and the Persian empires, and after he had galloped to Iraq, where he achieved one victory after another until he had liberated it. Then he had turned to Syria, where he had achieved one victory after another until he had set it free from the bonds of disbelief. In spite of his position as a commander, he was so modest that if you had seen him, you would not have distinguished him from among his soldiers. Yet at that same time, you would have known at once he must be a commander, from the way he shoulders his responsibilities and set himself as a good example. Again, the tragedy of this hero's life was dying in bed. He said, as his tears flowed, "All the battles I fought in my life left in my body scarred with wounds and stabs everywhere. Yet here I am dying in bed as if I had never witnessed war before. I hope that the cowards will not have a day's rest even after I am dead." These words were becoming of such a man. When the moment of departure was close, he dictated his will. Can you guess to whom he left his valuables? It was to Umar ibn al-Khattab himself. Can you guess what were his valuables? They were his horse and his weapon. And what? He had nothing else to bequeath but his horse and weapon. Thus, his only obsession while he was alive, was achieving victory over the enemies of truth. He was not in the least obsessed with life, with all its splendours and luxury. There was one thing that he obsessively cherished and treasured. It was his helmet. He lost it in the Battle of Al Yarmouk, and he exhausted himself and others in searching for it. When he was criticised for that, he said, "I keep it for luck, for it has some hairs on the Prophet's forehead. It makes me feel optimistic that victory is within reach." Finally, the body of the hero left his home, carried on the shoulders of his companions. The deceased's mother took one last look at the hero, her eyes full of determination tinged with sadness, as she commanded him to Allah's protection and said, "They are far, far better than 1,000 men who flung themselves into the battlefield. Do you ask me about his valour? He was much more courageous than a huge lion that protects his cubs in the time of danger. Do you ask me about his generosity? He was far more generous than an overwhelming torrential rain that slides down from the mountains." Umar's heart throbbed and eyes flowed with tears when he heard her recite these lines of poetry. "You spoke the truth, by Allah. He was everything you said he was." The hero was buried. His companions stood at his grave in reverence. They felt that the whole universe was so peaceful, humble, and silent that it seemed as if the whole world went into mourning. I imagine that this awesome stillness was broken only by the neighing of a horse that tugged at the halter and went to its master's grave, guided by its scent. As if reached the silent congregation and the most grave, it shook its bead and neighed sharply as if used to when the hero was on his back, devastating the thrones of Persia and Rome, curing the delusion of paganism and oppression, and eliminating the powers of backwardness and disbelief, to pave the way for Islam. As it fixed its eyes on the grave, it kept on raising and lowering its head, as if were bidding its last farewell to its master and hero. Alas, you hero of all victory, the dawn of all nights, you soared with your army above the horrors of war. When you said to your soldiers, the darkest hour is that before dawn, this became a saying afterwards. May Allah bless your mourning, Abu Salman. May Allah bestow glory, praise and eternity on you, Khalid. Let us now repeat after Umar, the commander of the faithful, the sweet elegy with which he paid his last farewell to Khalid. May Allah have mercy on you, Abu Salman. What you have now is far better than what you had in life, for you now are with Allah. You were honoured in life and now content in death. MashaAllah. Brothers and sisters, thank you for joining me for that beautiful story. Please keep joining us at Halal Radio 1, where we'll continue the stories of these magnificent men and what they achieved over the next 2 weeks now. It's less than 2 weeks in Ramadan. If you have any issues and need to ask any questions, please email us at Halal Radio, and we have an imam who's willing to answer any questions. Till tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum.